Hello, and welcome to Higher Education's War Against the Jewish People and Democratic Principles, featuring Dr. Charles Asher Small. This program is presented in partnership with the Rededication Project, CUNY Alliance for Inclusion, also known as CAFI, and the Institute for the Study of Global Antisemitism and Policy, also known as ISGAP. Thank you everyone for being here on Zoom, in person, those viewing this recording. We're grateful to see so many new and familiar faces. And very special thank you to you, Dr. Charles Asher Small, and the folks at ISGAP for helping to make this happen. My name is Michael Mantell. I'm a psychotherapist, an educator. I'm also the chair of events and programming at CAFI. So at this time, I'd like to take a moment to introduce Dr. Charles Asher Small. Dr. Small is the founder and executive director of ISGAP and the director of ISGAP Wolf Institute Fellowship Training Program in Critical Contemporary Anti-Semitism Studies, Discrimination, and Human Rights at the Wolf Institute in association with St. Edmund's College, University of Cambridge. Dr. Small is additionally a research fellow at St. Edmund's College. Dr. Small is committed to creating scholarly programming and research on contemporary anti-Semitism at world-renowned universities and establishing contemporary anti-Semitism studies as a recognized academic discipline. He is currently leading an international research project on the impact of soft power and undocumented funding on higher education as it pertains to anti-Semitism. Dr. Small is a human rights advocate and is active in the struggle against contemporary anti-Semitism, the demonization of Israel and the Jewish people, and how it relates directly to other forms of hatred and reactionary social movements. Dr. Small is the author of several books and has convened numerous groundbreaking academic seminar series in the emerging field of contemporary anti-Semitism studies. Dr. Small speaks widely on these matters at universities, governmental organizations, and other public institutions. We will have Dr. Small share, he'll be speaking, and then we will open up the program for Q&A. You can ask questions, you can share your comments. Please be respectful. That's one of the only ground rules here. The same goes for everyone on Zoom. If you do have a question or comment throughout the program, feel free, if you're on Zoom, to type your questions or comments in the chat. If you have a question, you can raise your virtual hand. And just a few announcements before we begin the program. We have a handful of wonderful programs coming up that I hope you save the date and join us for. After I tell you briefly about those upcoming programs, before Dr. Small begins his talk, Dr. Gabrielle Salfati, professor of psychology at John Jay College of Criminal Justice at CUNY, a CAFI executive committee member and chair of CAFI's communications, will briefly introduce you to CAFI. So our upcoming programs in the next 2 weeks. On Tuesday, March 11th at 7:30 p.m. in person at Baruch College in New York City, we invite you to join us for a wonderful program featuring Gary Osin of Osin Law, which is a law firm that specializes in counterterrorism and terror financing litigation and has taken on a unique post-October 7th litigation. So this is very important as well. And on Wednesday, March 12th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on Zoom and in person at the CUNY Grad Center, we invite you to another great program titled Arab Citizens of Israel, How Far Have They Come? The talk will document the dramatic transformation of the economic, occupational, political, and social situation of Arab citizens of Israel in the last 20 years. It will also explain how the treatment during 1948 war and the first 2 decades after is more nuanced than critics claim. The talk will be led by Robert Cherry, whose book about the history of Arab citizens in Israel will be available in fall 2025. I will stop there. I want to once again thank you all for being here on Zoom and in person, Dr. Small for being here with us. And with that, I'm going to bring Dr. Gabrielle Salfati to just do a brief introduction so you know who we are at CAFI. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm Gabrielle Sarfati. I'm speaking on behalf of CAFI, the CUNY Alliance for Inclusion. And I want to welcome our esteemed speaker, Dr. Small, and I want to welcome all of you. We are so thrilled to have you here today with us. We're sponsoring this event, and I want to give you a little bit of an introduction into who we are and why we're doing this, and also to give you a little bit of an overview of what's coming ahead and sort of what we do in New York City, what we do at CUNY, and maybe even how you can join us. So we are a group of faculty at the City University of New York. For those of you who are not aware of the CUNY establishment, the Graduate Center where you are today is one of our 20+ colleges that is part of CUNY, which is all over the 5 boroughs here in New York. And we are faculty across all of those colleges. And we represent both the Jewish community and the pro-Israel community. And we're here to support and advocate for that community at CUNY. We're comprised of faculty, staff, and also students and community allies. So what do? Well, our main role is to advocate for the inclusion of the Jewish and Israeli community at CUNY. As you probably all know, as you'll probably hear in today's talk, there have been a lot of issues at CUNY, and we're part of the group who actually try to see if we can resolve that. We fight demonization of Jews and Israel at CUNY, particularly regarding BDS, so divestment and boycott of Israel and everything to do with Israel. We counter the boycotts, and we are essentially fighting with the university and with the union on those matters as well. But apart from all of that, what we also do is we create community as part of the community in general, and we're a community both of Jewish people and non-Jewish people, but a lot of people after October 7th have found it very difficult, and they don't have a community. One of the things that we're trying to do, including events such as today, is try to bring us together and give us somewhere to go, to talk, to share ideas, and to feel supported by one another. So this is who we are, but we also welcome people to join us. There's no cost to join us. We're a grassroots organization across CUNY. And if you are interested, you can join at many different levels. You can join us simply by coming to our events, and we're going to have, as you heard, a number of different events across CUNY over the next few months, and it's going to be both in person and online. It's going to be really, really exciting. We're trying to bring fantastic speakers, and we're so honored because to have you here, Dr. Small, it's amazing. We also have a listserv that we send out messages and newsletters to our community. We have a WhatsApp group that lets you know what's going on and you can talk to each other. We have resources as well for all of you, articles, references, anything that you're interested in to be part of this community. And so that is the part where you are the recipients of information. For those of you who are interested in getting involved, we do a lot of work at the university, and we get very involved in New York City in terms of fighting for the inclusion of Jews and Israelis. Mostly our focus really is the CUNY campus, but we work in collaboration with universities across New York City, New York State, and as well as across the whole of the United States. So with that, I am not going to speak anymore, but you all have a flyer on your seats. For those of you who came in late, I'm going to be handing out more. And if you have any questions, and if you did want to join us, you could just come and see me today, or you can go on our website. There's a QR code on the sheet that you have. You can also just photograph it. We have our online thing. As of Friday, you can join directly online. Up till then, you can just come to me today and give me your email if you have any questions at all. And with that, thank you so much again for joining us today. It's been absolutely wonderful talk. Over to you, Dr. Small.
So thank you very much. And I'm really honored to be here. And it's wonderful to see, a group of engaged people in the CUNY environment or in the institution coming together to deal with a crisis. And I think I'll start off by saying that in every crisis, there's opportunities. And I think we should never lose sight of that. But this is definitely a crisis that is not just a challenge to the Jewish community and Jewish students and Jewish faculty, but it's really a crisis of democracy, a crisis at many levels against the basic values and foundational elements of a democratic society. And I'll speak to this. So I think many of you may know ISGAP, the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy, is an international academic research center. We do work, high-level scholarship, and try to do work that's impactful in the world of policy. We try to get the best minds from an interdisciplinary perspective, some of the best scholars and students, to really study and engage the rise of contemporary anti-Semitism, the rise of social movements that are reactionary, the extreme left, the extreme right, and political Islam, and to get the best minds focused on the processes of what's going into this crisis, and then to take it and engage in teaching, engage in research projects that have an impact, and to take our work to Washington, to Ottawa, to London, to Paris, and to Israel, to try and make a change in policy. We also increasingly work with security, with the NYPD, the LAPD. We just did a very intensive program in Rome with 30 top generals of various parts of the security forces and police forces, trying to understand the threat of anti-Semitism, not just to the Jewish community, not just to Jewish students and faculty, but to the very stability of our society. Professor Elie Wiesel, who I'm sure many of you know, I had the amazing privilege and honor to start ISGAP with him. He was our first honorary president. And Elie Wiesel always taught us, that anti-Semitism is not a parochial problem for the Jewish people or for Israel. That anti-Semitism always begins with the Jews, but it never ever ends with the Jews. It's an attack on human decency, and it's an attack, a violent attack on the very essence and foundational elements and institutions and values of our society, of our democratic society. So it begins with the Jews, but it never ends with the Jews. And tragically, I'd say once again, we are the early warning system. We are the early warning system for the assault on democracy and human decency. So, here we are. And I'm hearing some of the stories that are happening at CUNY, some of the stories at UPenn, where there is my colleagues at UPenn are speaking of a purge. They use the word purge of Jewish faculty with tenure from important committees. I just spoke to some journalists who did my doctorate at St. Anthony's College in Oxford. St. Anthony's College, if anybody knows at Oxford, when I went there in the early to mid 90s, was I wouldn't say predominantly Jewish, but there was a strong Jewish contingent of graduate students from Israel and from North America primarily. I'd say 25–30% of the students were Jewish. And it was a very open environment. There were scholars from the Middle East and scholars from Arab countries and Israel. And we were engaging in debate and dialogue and not always agreeing, but using sort of the best of the culture of a liberal education, where people would present papers, present arguments that were sourced and referenced, and people would listen and people would read, and they would give us a rebuttal. I'd present something on anti-Semitism and Zionism, and my Palestinian and Lebanese scholars and colleagues would read it. They wouldn't agree with it, but they'd come back. I'd have 10 sources, they'd come back with 20 sources. I'd read their material and I'd come back with 30 sources. And we'd have meals together, cook for each other. That was the environment. Yesterday, I spoke to a journalist looking at the purge of Jewish faculty and students from St. Anthony's College. There is one student left who's Jewish, and her life is miserable. That's St. Anthony's College at Oxford University. In 2019, just to give you a sense, so to go backwards, a friend of mine who was the first Black African Rhodes Professor of Race Relations, it is a very prestigious professorship, always given to liberal Anglo-Saxon Southern African gentleman. He was the first Black African to get this prestigious professorship. And he held a conference in African Studies, which is an institute at St. Anthony's College, on racism and nationalism. He's a friend of the Jewish people. He's a serious scholar, cares about the rise of anti-Semitism. And he invited me to come to his conference and to do a call for papers among our ISGAP colleagues. ISGAP has about 80 research fellows associated with us from around the world. We have over 600 graduates from our Oxford training program, which I'll do a plug. Any of the scholars in this room will want to come to Oxford for 2 weeks in July and August. We do an intensive training program for professors and help you create curriculum on contemporary anti-Semitism studies. It's a wonderful program. I think the best thing we do, actually. We have 600 graduates. We did a call for paper, and we had 3 panels come to this conference on racism and nationalism in the African Studies Institute at St. Anthony's College. We had 12 colleagues, African Americans. One of my colleagues, Harold Bennett, is the Martin Luther King Professor of Theology and Philosophy at Morehouse College, where Martin Luther King went to. He's the Martin Luther King Professor. Avraham Nagusa, who's currently the Israeli ambassador to Ethiopia, who's has smicha as a rabbi, has a PhD in philosophy from Sussex University, walked from Ethiopia, walked to Israel as a child. He was on the panel. Yossi Shane, a very eminent scholar from Tel Aviv University of Political Science. Ansel Brown, Alan Dershowitz prized, graduate student from Harvard, who's in the historically Black College in North Carolina. We were a group of 12 serious scholars. We went to the conference at the college, and scholars started standing up saying that the Zionists were in the room. The apartheid fascist Zionists were in the room, and that the Zionist Jews were paying my friend Wally, the Rhodes professor, money to take over African studies because the insidious Jews are going to take over African studies. And one by one, everybody in that room, 112 professors and a few graduate students, mostly from the United States of America, at UCLA, from Harvard, from Princeton, the list from UPenn, from the University of Chicago, everybody stood up in that room and told us to leave. We were not permitted to present our scholarly papers on the panel on racism and nationalism. One professor from Ghana, one brave woman, walked out with us, and we were literally pushed out of an academic conference from professors. And now one student is left at St. Anthony's College. We were removed. And in a sense, how did we get to this place? Edward, and how did we remain silent when scholars were teaching some of the most pernicious things in our most prestigious universities for decades? In 1983, Edward Said said that he was the last remaining Jewish intellectual, and that he was the inheritor to the Frankfurt School of Thought. As many of you I'm sure know, Frankfurt School of Thought was created mostly by Jewish refugees from Germany who made it to the United States of America and created a very important framework of schools of thought on society. Horkheimer, Adorno, Hannah Arendt, and others were associated with it. And he said that he was the inheritor to the Frankfurt School of Thought, and that he was the last true Jewish intellectual, and that the Jewish scholars in the United States of America became fat scribes in the suburbs, that the Palestinians were the Jews and the Israelis were the Nazis. So in 1983, when he said this, people thought he may have had a bad day, detached from reality. But in 2025, at our best universities, at the best classrooms in the United States of America, the same in Canada, the same in Oxbridge, the same in the Sorbonne, this is the discourse. This is the discourse that the Israelis and the Jews are the Nazis, and that the Palestinians are the survivors of apartheid and genocide. And this is the discourse. We have to remember the role of intellectuals. It was the intellectuals leading up to Nazism that created the notion of race. It's deeply embedded in our theology, Western theology, in philosophy. You know, von Herder, all these scholars of that now, you know, Charles Taylor and Kimlicka and Foucault took as the foundation for multiculturalism and identity, created this notion that race was inherent into people. It was an inherent character that you can't escape. It was innate in every group of people. And these categories. And there were categorizations. White people were at the top, and the darker you went, the more inferior you became. And this was in the theology. This was in the philosophy and the social science. This was in science, biology, and eugenics from the best universities. So the Jew who lived in societies and places throughout the Middle East and parts of Europe for many, many generations were suddenly defined racially as not white and poisoning the purity of the white Aryan race. And the result of this racist anti-Semitism was the annihilation of the Jewish people in the Holocaust, the removal and extermination of the Jewish people from Europe and beyond, North Africa as well. Fast forward less than 2 generations later, the intellectual clowns who speak fancy language of postmodernity and abstract language and concepts. The intellectual clowns that teach in these halls, that teach our children, are now, in less than 2 generations, the Jew that was defined as not white to exterminate. Now, the Jewish people are not only white, it's not that we're white, welcome to the club, and we're so sorry for what happened to you. In less than 2 generations, these intellectual clowns have convinced us and convinced our students and convinced the journals that we are white supremacists, we are the epitome of racism and apartheid. And ladies and gentlemen, if we support apartheid, if Israel is an apartheid racist settler society, then from a liberal human rights perspective, it has to be heavily reformed, if not dismantled. If the Jewish people are supporting a racist apartheid state in this intellectual environment and political environment discourse, then we are the enemy of all that is good and decent. And I'll never forget, in November of 2023, weeks after the pogrom, I went to a teach-in at no less than Columbia University, one of the best universities in this country and in the world.
Formerly.
It still is in the, you know, in the popular imagination. I know. But I listened to professors of gender studies. I listened to professors of social sciences and social work. I listened to their graduate students, some of the most learned people in this society, in this country. These are the people who are teaching our children. These are the people who have mastered, they're masters of the literature, of philosophy, of social theory, of literary criticism. And they were arguing that the entity, Israel, is a occupying entity, a settler occupying entity, all of it. And that by any means necessary, by all means, including violence, the entity, the occupying entity, has to be destroyed with violence. And there were professors of gender studies, feminists in quotations. My mother was a feminist. I grew up in feminist, in 1975, she was ousted from the feminist movement in Canada. That was the year that the Nazi war criminal, Kurt Waldheim, helped to pass a resolution that Zionism is racism and celebrated at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in New York City. So women, Jewish women, were removed from the feminist movement around that time. Kurt Walter, Nazi worker. So here at Columbia University, they were arguing that Israel has to be eliminated by violence, and feminist scholars, doctoral students and professors were arguing that the violence against the women, the Jewish women, the settlers, would only end if the occupation ends, and that the rape and torture and murder of Jewish Israeli women was justified. And they went on to say, ladies and gentlemen, that anybody who stands in the way of ending the occupation are the enemies and need to be met with resistance. They use the most sophisticated intellectual language you can imagine. And ladies and gentlemen, this was a sophisticated call for the murder of Columbia University faculty and students who were Jewish and or anybody who supported Israel. This is the environment. So if we take, if we take a step back and place the role of intellectuals, intellectual thought, as it relates to anti-Semitism, what is happening today is not an anomaly. Anti-Semitism is deeply rooted in Western thought. I grew up in Canada. Most of you, I assume, are from the United States. We're all North Americans. My father couldn't go to McGill University because he was a Jew and there were quotas, similar to what happened in the United States. Canada was maybe a generation or half a generation behind the opening of institutions to the Jewish community. So I was fortunate. I went to McGill and I got a good education. In quotations, the doors were open to us, as they were similarly here. But we really have to see how anti-Semitism is deeply rooted in our society, and the study of anti-Semitism doesn't take place in these institutions. Yes, we study the Holocaust. There's Holocaust studies, which is important. But if you have a good liberal education, you become somewhat fluent in the ideas of racism, sexism, more recently homophobia. And if you have a good liberal education, you understand that racism, for example, is deeply rooted in the United States, in American society, in Western thought. That we have in our literature, in our philosophy, in our theology, there's racism. Our cities are subjugated with at least the remnants of slavery and of Jim Crow. If you get a good liberal education and you study gendered inequality and sexism, you understand that women were excluded from important elements of society, from access to education, to voting, and that although we've made progress, the remnants of sexism is still in our society and still in employment, how people are paid. Although I believe we're making progress, but that sexism is still in our language, still in our culture and symbols, it's in our music. Maybe even our music, things are deteriorating and that, in social media, maybe we're going backwards when it comes to racism and sexism. But if you have a good liberal education, you are somewhat aware of racism and sexism. When it comes to understanding contemporary anti-Semitism, we're not literate. We don't have courses on it. We don't have serious analysis of it. And I think this is one of the weaknesses of our society. And this is one of the hatreds which has been so difficult to pin down, to define, and then to convince people of goodwill that there are problems. Right? If you speak about racism and sexism to somebody who's educated and open-minded and decent, you'll usually you'll have an open ear, usually. And when it comes to our issues here, which everybody is getting organized about, it's very difficult to have been convincing people that it's an issue and a problem. And then after October the 7th, there's been this polarization and this crisis, which we're all experiencing. So I think at one level, and this will be a generational issue, if we're successful, is putting the study of contemporary anti-Semitism on the academic table to really investigate it from an interdisciplinary, serious perspective, to start writing and publishing and analyzing the processes, economic, social, cultural, political, that are creating the conditions for this explosion of anti-Semitism, putting the best minds into it, writing journals, books, teaching students, etc. And from this knowledge, where, you know, young people come to universities where they learn to be citizens. This is where they learn to be citizens. And right now, we're learning, our institutions are teaching young Americans to hate Jews. These are our future professors. These are our future journalists. These are our future leaders of industry and leaders of government. It's a crisis. So one of the projects, I'll just mention two projects. First of all, we have a small resilience group, if anybody is interested to cooperate. We have a wonderful scholars creating an environment for our graduates of our summer program and our researchers to have a space to come and deal with the issues and challenges, social issues and academic issues, together in a small informal group. If anybody's welcome to join, to cooperate, or we should collaborate, I guess, or help each other. There's this. One of the projects we're doing is called Jewish Consciousness, which I think is a wonderful project that I think could have an academic, important academic implications. So as a young kid, so I'm not, you know, a fascist apartheid supporting, Trump supporting, you know, the drill, just because I believe Israel has a right to exist. But when I was younger, I came from a human rights background. I was very active in the Soviet Jewry movement, and the Ethiopian Jews, or before the Ethiopian Jews, before they were able to go to Israel, we were smuggling people into Canada. It's a whole long story. I was involved in that, and through these activities in the Jewish community in Montreal, I became involved in the anti-apartheid movement. And my mentor, who brought me into the movement, was the teacher of Stephen Biko. I'm sure many of you must know who Biko was. And as they said, he conscientized Stephen Biko. My mentor was a South African political refugee who married a Jewish American woman. It's a whole long story. We met in Canada. And so he taught me about many things, including Stephen Biko. And what Biko did was create the Black Consciousness Movement. The Black Consciousness Movement rejected European racist notions of white and black. Once you start labeling South Africans as black, you remove all of their culture, all of their wisdom, all of their religion and cosmology. They're black objects. They rejected this and went to the wisdom of their culture, to their connection to the earth, their connection to cosmology. And this was a way to resist the racist categorization of Black South Africans. And what we're doing is sort of emulating this movement, but one of the things that the Jewish people have, which is extraordinary, despite being in exile for 2,000 years, is that we have access to our culture and to our wisdom. We're very fortunate. You know, you can take, you know, your iPhone, and all the wisdom, the Torah, the Talmud, the Mishnah, all the writings of the rabbi, they're all here. We have access to it. And we're teaching young Jewish students that, you know, we are a people, we're a nation. And we don't see each other simply on phenotypical features. We're a people. We have ethics. We know who we are. Our connection to our land, our ethics of treating the other. Emmanuel Levinas, great Jewish philosopher who brings Jewish thought to the academy, you know, uses Pirkei Avot, right, to say that the moment we see our face in the face of the other, the moment we see our face in the face of the other, our face in the face of the other, is the instant we become a human being. We need the other to be human. This is not tolerance. This is not categorization. This is Jewish ethics, that we all come from the same source, the same God. Jewish ethics is powerful. So we're arming young Jewish students and faculty actually on defining ourselves and not allowing our enemies, I choose the word deliberately, to define us. And who are these people to define us? Imagine. Your parents, your grandparents, your intellectual pedagogy and heritage has defined the Jew to the point of exterminating us. And now less than 2 generations, you have the chutzpah, the audacity to define me. And we take this. We're not white, we are white. Imagine the chutzpah after the Holocaust, to minimize the Holocaust and then to define the Jewish people, the Jewish community, to tell us who we are. So we need to connect or reconnect to our magnificent wisdom and heritage and interpret it as we wish. From an Orthodox perspective, a conservative perspective, an intellectual perspective, a practical perspective. And it's all this space that we could enter into our wisdom. And to hell with the intellectuals who have the audacity to define us. And then they parade out Bible, who sits at his bookshelf with his Jewish books that never been opened.
This knowledge.
And Judith Butler, a Jewish gay intellectual. If we were walking down the streets of Gaza, I'd get 1 bullet for being a Jewish Zionist guy. She'd get 3. She's Jewish. She's a woman with a career that has the chutzpah to go out of her home without accompanied by a man, which is forbidden. And she's gay. And she argues that Hezbollah Hamas must be understood as the progressive global left. And she's listened to. And she's a very important scholar. Now, how did we get into this mess? One of the things that we're doing, and I want to have time for Q&A and conversation. One of the things that we're doing at ISGAP is we're doing a project called Follow the Money. And when I was at Yale, I directed the first research center ever in a North American university on anti-Semitism, which should be a study in and of itself. Why did it take until 2006 to start the first center on anti-Semitism at a North American university? We were there, we were doing quite well. Yale wanted to expand our efforts. They were going to start matching dollar for dollar any money that we raised. This is after 4 years of working with them. As a Canadian Israeli, I'm also Israeli, proud to be Israeli. There's a special program in the United States of America through the State Department. Exceptional intellectuals. There's about 100 green cards that could be given under this very special program. And Yale asked me if I'd like to have a green card. I was very honored, and because of Yale, within 3 months, I had a green card, exception. So Yale got me this green card on this special program because our center was doing well 4 years into it. They wanted to expand it, and they wanted me there. In 2010, we did a major conference on contemporary anti-Semitism, and we had the audacity to look at the Muslim Brotherhood. We had the audacity to look at political Islam and its anti-democratic social ideology, its anti-Semitism, its sexism, its homophobia. In a short period of time after this international conference with 600 people and 102 or 106 papers that were presented from scholars from more than 30 countries, a decision was made secretly to close our center. All of our staff, all of our faculty, we were dismissed with no explanation. It's a whole story. We've been speaking with us for a long time. But anyways, a few days later, somebody at Stanford offered me a fellowship. So I went off to Stanford for 3 years. And one night in Palo Alto, California, a beautiful place, I was finishing writing a book, a large 5-volume book on anti-Semitism. And I'm always late, so I'm 2 months past the deadline that the publisher was giving me. So, in typical fashion, I was up for like 6 weeks, not sleeping, not eating. And I finished the manuscript. And it was around 11 o'clock at night, and I was alone in this little place in Palo Alto. So I started surfing the internet. I grew up in Canada. I was looking at hockey scores on the internet, looking at old emails. And I came across an email from Charles Hogan. Charles Robin Hogan was one of the vice presidents of Yale, who was not only openly anti-Israel, but I would say openly anti-Semitic in the most classic ways. And he wanted me out, he wanted to close our center. So I Googled Charles Robin Hogan. And it turns out that he worked for a pharmaceutical company. He was the vice president of communications in Cambridge, Massachusetts, before he joined Yale. And I Googled the pharmaceutical company, and I'm sitting there like 1 o'clock in the morning in Palo Alto. I do social theory and anti-Semitism, anyways. And then I see it's owned by a Saudi businessman. So I Google the Saudi businessman. Turns out he owns a chemical factory in Sudan that the Clinton administration bombed because the chemical factory was creating weapons for terrorists in parts of Africa. So I'm sitting there 1 or 2 in the morning now, and I'm Googling, and I'm finding banks, the Arab Bankers Association, Lebanese foundations, a connection to Yale, a connection to Harvard. This gentleman, before Charles Hogan went to Yale, within months of him being at Yale, this individual who ran these terror chemical factories was giving a lot of money to Yale, and he was part of the Muslim Brotherhood. So I started Googling, I came up with all this stuff in a few hours, and I thought, either I'm crazy, or this is a tip of an iceberg. So I found some experts on terrorism, scholars of security studies and terrorism, and I gave it to them. I said, I found this stuff, am I crazy, or is there something there? And I gave it to 3 scholars, one by one, they said, yes, we know this bank, we know this foundation, we know this name. So to make a long story short, this was 2012. From 2012 to 2019, my parents' neighbor, who's a retired forensic accountant, worked with me for free, for nothing. He was obsessed with this. And a friend of mine who's also an expert on the Muslim Brotherhood. I didn't know really anything about the Muslim Brotherhood. Anyways, in 7 years with no budget, we found $3 billion with a B, going from the Muslim Brotherhood to American universities that were not reporting to the Department of Education or the IRS as required by law. To make a long story short, I had the opportunity, after knocking on doors for almost 2 years, we presented our work in Washington, and in 2019, under the previous Trump administration, they launched the federal investigation. Within 6 months, they found $18 billion in undocumented money. The first thing the Biden administration did when they came to power was call off the federal investigation. And I think they did this not because of anti-Semitism or protecting the Muslim Brotherhood, but universities have a very powerful lobby in Washington. And universities want the free flow of money and people, students, scholars, and investment. But because of our success in helping to launch the federal investigation, ISGAP got more funding to do more sophisticated research. And now we've assembled a team of forensic accountants and experts in terror financing, experts in the Muslim Brotherhood, and experts in anti-Semitism. And since the October 7th pogrom, we've come up with 12 reports. We found nearly $1 trillion in assets from Qatar that they're using for soft power. Buying universities, buying media outlets, buying law firms, PR firms, real estate in the West, $1 trillion. We found 10 billion that was given to Cornell University and not reported. We found many millions going to Yale, not reported. Columbia University, we did a report on Columbia with the funding and with the politics there. Texas A&M, we did 2 reports. We found $1.3 billion that Qatar gave to Texas A&M. They have a contract which is unusual. Texas A&M gave the intellectual property rights for all the research projects to the Qatari regime. We found 504 research projects. 58 have dual-use military implications, and 13 have dual-use military nuclear research implications. Qatar has allies like the Taliban, the Iranian Revolutionary Regime, and we know Hamas. They still house Hamas. They funded Hamas. The royal family of Qatar has a bayah. In Hebrew, it means a problem, which is accurate. In Islamic thought, it represents means a spiritual oath. The Qatari royal family has a spiritual oath to the Muslim Brotherhood. Do people know the ideology of the Muslim Brotherhood? Anybody study the Brotherhood? You have. If you want to understand contemporary anti-Semitism, please acquaint yourself with the Brotherhood. I did political science at McGill. I went to Oxford. I kind of heard of the Brotherhood. I didn't really know anything about the Brotherhood until the early 2000s when I started studying it. The Muslim Brotherhood started in Egypt about 100 years ago and took, I would argue, a perversion of Islam. That's a perversion of Islam with connecting it with European genocidal anti-Semitism. It took the protocols of the elders of Zion. It took Nazi ideology, and I'm choosing my words deliberately. I'm saying to you this as a scholar, a well-researched scholar. The protocols of the elders of Zion, as many of you know, are the lies that led to the Holocaust, led to the removal of Jewish people from society. If you read the Hamas charter, if they were a student in my class, I'd kick the students out because they literally plagiarized, they took the protocols and put it into their constitution. Hamas is the Palestinian chapter of the Muslim Brotherhood. Qatar, a great friend of the United States, Qatar that has the most important American military base in the region, Qatar, which houses Education City, which has Cornell, Georgetown, and other prestigious universities. They have campuses in Qatar. They just entered into an agreement with CNN. They're influencing, as we know, the BBC and other important mainstream media. The Brotherhood, so the Qatari regime adheres to all the religious edicts, fatwas, and rulings of the Brotherhood. Yosef Qaradawi, who was the spirit, he just passed away a couple of years ago. He was the spiritual head of the Muslim Brotherhood. Yosef Qaradawi preached his entire life that the true believer, the true Muslim, is obligated to complete the work of Hitler. This is the spiritual leader of Qatar. Okay, they're very clear on who they are. They're very clear on their ideology. We in the West are either ignorant, we don't know the minds of our adversaries, or think that if we're nice, they're going to change their values. This is their ideology. So the Muslim Brotherhood through Qatar is funding our best universities. Is it any wonder that there's an explosion of anti-Semitism at our best universities when they're putting so much soft power into the university? You know, I tell my friends, ISGAP has a small center at Cambridge University. If we have a budget of probably $300,000 a year, I know that we have a very good relations. I know that Cambridge would never want to put an anti-Israeli director or scholar in our center. They know we would walk away. We have good relations. And I'm coming with $300,000 a year, and I'm a respected member of the community. Could you imagine if I came with 1.3 billion, 10 billion to Cornell? How much sway I would have, even though I may be supporting science, technology, and nothing deliberately anti-Israel. So just think of that. How we've sold our basic principles, our basic tenets of liberal education to anti-democratic, genocidal actors. Yosef Qaradawi, who calls that all the true believer, the true Muslim, is obligated to complete the work of Hitler. He started Islamic studies at Oxford University, my alma mater. It's one of the most important centers of Islamic studies in the Western world. Started by a movement that believes that the true Muslim must finish the work of Hitler. The British establishment took their money, the American establishment is taking their money. I'll just end by this. We're doing one report that's coming out in a couple of months by a brilliant Egyptian intellectual who's now a refugee, a political refugee, asylum seeker here in the United States. It's called The Project. 40 years ago, the FBI and the Swiss intelligence found documents outlining the strategic goals of the Muslim Brotherhood in the West. And it was said 40 years ago, that this is the Muslim Brotherhood strategy, that they were going to use their efforts, their good offices in Western countries that they were going to establish, to move Israel away from the United States and Europe, to isolate it, to weaken it, to destroy it, destroy Israel, and murder Jews around the world. The little Satan. And then they're going to use anti-Semitism to fragment and weaken and destroy the United States of America. When you would read this 40 years ago, it seems a bit crazy. But on October the 9th, the Monday we all went back to school, we were met with an explosion of a well-orchestrated movement. SJP comes out of AMP, which is the Muslim Brotherhood. And our Jewish community, I remember going to Hillel. I was the president of Hillel when I was a kid at McGill. I love Hillel. My parents were on the board of Hillel in Canada. And I'd go to Hillel and say, you're telling young Jewish kids to go to Shabbatons with SJP kids to make peace on campus. Do you understand their ideology? And of course, even though I come from a progressive, social democratic country of Canada, where healthcare and education is a human right, and I went and got my Ivy League equivalent education for 200 Canadian dollars a year, $120 US. Because that's Canada. And I helped to fight apartheid, and I helped to fight for human rights. I came out of Hillel. And my community here must assume that I must be some right-wing Islamophobe. And nothing could be further from the truth, because decent Muslims living in the United States of America who are good citizens and want to be citizens here, or in Britain and France, and I believe they're the vast majority. Our governments have taken the Muslim Brotherhood and the jihadists as the authentic Muslim voice for cash, for money, for favor, and prop them up as the true representatives of a community, which is debasing decent Muslim Americans. So this is the threat. This is the war against the Jewish people. This is the war against basic liberal democratic principles. Higher education is the most important, sensitive institution in our democracy. This is where young people learn to be citizens. So the question is, how can a university take money from a social movement that calls for the liquidation of Jews? How can we allow professors less than 2 generations after the Holocaust to say that Jews are white supremacists that need to be removed? How is it possible that we take money from a social movement that wants to murder gay people and subjugate women? How is it possible that our great intellectuals in gender studies and feminist studies and social theory and literary criticism and Middle East studies articulate these views? And I'll submit to you, one of the things that we're doing, indeed, we take our reports to DC. In the United States of America, the government cannot fund businesses or institutions that practice discrimination. It's against the law. And we are now here, and I'm sure many of us have many stories, where Jewish students are not just socially ostracized as I was as a kid going to school decades ago, but Jewish students and faculty are physically threatened on campus. So there's intellectual hatred, there's physical threats and calls for violence by professors and by students and by encampments. And so far, not much has changed. So I think the work that everybody in this room I know is connected to, the work that your groups are doing is so important, it's so timely. And it's not just about the Jewish people and community, which it is, but it's basically really, this is fighting for democratic rights and principles. It's fighting for democracy. It's fighting for equality under one legal system. And this is our struggle. So this is the human rights struggle. And anybody who sides with, the Muslim Brotherhood, a perversion of Islam, a great religion with over 1.5 billion adherents, intellectually, after what we've been watching, these sadistic parades and coffins, it's insanity. So I really believe the truth is on our side, and we have to be strong and resilient. And the Jewish people have done incredible things. From the ashes of the Holocaust, some crazy Jewish people thought we could rebirth our homeland. Crazy dream. If they could do that and create such a vibrant, multicultural, technologically advanced, vibrant, the food and the culture and the liveliness that Israel is, we in this democratic country, our task is not as great, but it's very serious. And I think this really is the last bastion of democracy. So I applaud what you're doing, and I'm really honored to be here, and I'm happy to take comments or questions.
Yeah, we definitely can open this up for everyone to ask questions. Again, most important thing is to be respectful. I will just open it up right away, but I think it'll be good for us to have the mic so that people online can hear the question, or do you prefer just to repeat the question? All right, so we'll do it this way. Thank you. All right, we'll share it. Thank you, Gabrielle.
I'm very curious and dying to know, how much does Norman Finkelstein get paid? How much does Gabor Mate, his son Aaron Mate, and people like Medea Benjamin from Coping, do these people get funding from these groups, or are they just passionately and Jews against Israel?
I don't know enough about, I used to really, I still appreciate Mate's work in psychology. He was, I think, a bit of a genius. It's really sad to see this part. I don't know enough from my perspective, which is not knowledgeable, but a gut feeling, is that I think that children of survivors have a lot of issues. You're the psychologist, social worker. And Mate and Finkelstein are both kind of affected by the legacy of the Holocaust. I wonder if that plays a role in all of this. Code Pink is definitely funded by and connected to Iran and other sources, that's for sure, that I know.
He's such a virulent media spokesperson, represents the anti-Zionist Jewish community.
I honestly don't know, but Finkelstein developed a real following in academic, when he would go to campus, he'd get a big crowd, so I don't know the question, it's a good question, I don't know the answer.
I think this is
Thank you so much. I was also at McGill and originally Canadian, and I teach at CUNY. So I want to thank you so much for all the work you've been doing. And I want to ask you a question that, yes, we survived the Holocaust and we're hopefully surviving all this anti-Semitism. But if Qatar and the Muslim Brotherhood and all these other crazy people have billions and trillions of dollars that they're using to buy people. I know you said a lot of things about defining who we are according to what we are, not according to what they tell us. But I mean, we don't have those trillions and trillions of dollars to buy everybody else. So how do you begin?
So it's a good question. I don't want to sound glib, but I really believe the truth is on our side. I still believe that this country is a democracy. And look, we're doing research, and our research is really high quality academic research. Everything we write is footnoted and sourced. There's no conjecture. We have a lot more to write, but we would never put it in a report if we can't substantiate it in the highest form of scholarship, because if we make one or two mistakes or one mistake, or all of our credibility will fall down. Qatar is breaking the law. And I think that if we keep pushing and advocating, and if people read our reports, and now there's more reports coming out beyond ISGAP, it's becoming kind of more well known that Qatar is an issue. So the more that we can read, the more that we can teach, the more that we can speak to our families and friends, it's creating awareness, and I think there is a bit of a movement on this. I really believe that if we keep doing our research, and as a community of scholars and intellectuals and journalists, we keep reporting it, it will have impact. And I think even though, you know, this new administration, or parts of the new administration, you know, I don't necessarily agree with, you know, and I'll just leave it at that. But on these issues of anti-Semitism, there seems to be an openness. In the last few weeks, you know, I've met since October the 7th, I met over 140 congressional leaders, 50 odd senators. We've testified at committees and at briefings in the Senate and the Congress. And I'd say in the last month, we're getting approached. You know, we did a big report on South Africa. The Treasury Department has contacted us, the Department of Education. We had a big meeting with Homeland Security today. There seems to be an acknowledgement and awareness in this administration that anti-Semitism, the executive order, it seems, it's still early, but different departments are taking this seriously. So I hope if we can provide good material to the government that changes will happen. We can't afford not to be hopeful. We have to continue.
Gonna go backwards and forwards between the sides.
Thank you for the lecture. There is something a bit unsettled for me when you connect the Muslim Brothers to Hitler. That's something like I really hard to understand because I learned about the Holocaust, obviously. There is all the race theory and anti-Semite, basically against the Semite race. But as far as I understand, also the Muslims are the same race or something like that. You talk about white supremacy. When you see neo-Nazism in here or around the world, it's always about white supremacy. I'm trying to understand, obviously there is no justification for anti-Semites, but like, what is the motive of like the Muslim hate on that manner? Because it's not a matter of race, as far as I know.
Yeah, so it's a good question. And it's a complicated history. So the Muslim Brotherhood emerges in Egypt 100 years ago as a reaction to British colonialism. And the Nazis were fighting the British. So the Muslim Brotherhood made an alliance with the Nazis. Husseini goes to Berlin to meet Hitler, which is a famous issue. And there was this idea that the Muslim Brotherhood and the Arab leaders of the time would assist the Nazis with the final solution in their neighborhood. And you can clearly see with Yosef Qaradawi repeatedly telling people, preaching that the true Muslim is obligated to finish the work of Hitler.
They need to kill themselves afterwards, or like, you know.
They may be doing that, but that's a whole other story.
It's the same thing like the Judith Butlers, right? I mean, it's.
But I think there were some exceptions. You know, the race theory, first of all, it's all, you know, there's not, ultimately race is a social construction. But because it could be fluid, if I can use that word. You know, the Arabs were Semitic, but they weren't perceived by some Nazis as a different people. And there was the Aryan, you know, the Aryans came from India and from parts of the Middle East to Germany. They concocted stories that fit.
So it's not startled in any way of like, okay, there is a way to connect that. It's like it's two pieces of puzzle for me that doesn't like connect.
Yeah, but if you think about it, race is not a rational thing.
For sure. Yeah.
Okay, so if you're creating the identities and it's advantageous to you in some twisted way to create a category of people who are different but really the same, you can do it. And I think regardless of what the Nazis thought of the Arabs or the Semitic people, right? Which is really the notion of a Semitic race is not. It's a problematic idea, which I don't subscribe to.
Thank you.
But I'll just say that the ideology that the Brotherhood adopted was clearly and overtly and proudly linked to the protocols of the Elders of Zion and Nazi ideology. So as contradictory and hypocritical as it may sound, this is what their motivation was.
And I just want to say, it's like you and your colleagues, speak about the Red-Green Alliance,
Yes.
something that would seem so counterintuitive to join forces. I don't know if that's something you
Sure.
are able to speak a little bit more about, or?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, yeah.
Yeah,
And also, in terms of your question, there's a wonderful book on Islam and Islamism by Bassam Tibi, who was a fellow with us. And there's a chapter 4 talks about Islamist anti-Semitism. It's a wonderful book. And he argued, and I agree with him, that anti-Semitism was a distinctly genocidal phenomenon, unlike other forms of hatred. It's inherently genocidal. And that anti-Semitism was a European idea that was imported into the Middle East or into Arab countries, say in the last century or so. There was discrimination against Jews, there were pogroms against Jews in Arab countries, but not anti-Semitism. You would say there was Jewish discrimination. The anti-Semitism really enters, I would say, with the development of the Muslim Brotherhood. And Christian missionaries in Syria, but yeah.
you want
The
to,
Red-Green Alliance. Yeah, I think in a nutshell, there's the rise of right-wing hatred, racism and anti-Semitism in the United States that's very serious. It should not be underestimated. But I think in our space of universities and high culture and the quotation institutions like the media of record and top universities, it's the extreme left-wing anti-Semitism that's the biggest challenge or the biggest manifestation of anti-Semitism. If a Nazi came in, or Kanye West came in with a swastika, or whatever it is, I don't think, professors who may hate Israel or may hate Jewish identity would, defend a Nazi, right? They don't belong in this space. And I think if anybody articulated a Nazi white supremacist ideology, their future in institutions of higher learning or the media of record would be finished. But on the left, I would argue that anti-Semitism is not only tolerated, as my colleague David Patterson, the wonderful professor, would argue, it's morally required. Morally required. And anti-Semitism throughout history in its different manifestations, it was theological or racist during German Nazi times, was morally required. So there's I'm going to be very brief.
no, please, don't be brief.
Okay. I would argue there's three major phases of anti-Semitism. So here comes the history of anti-Semitism in 90 seconds, so forgive me. There was the theological Christian notion of the Messiah, of anti-Semitism. And because the Jew didn't accept the Christian notion of the Messiah, Christian teachings believed that the Jew was blinded by evil and could not have redemption. And what made anti-Semitism inherently genocidal is that the teaching was that if the stubborn Jews do not accept the Christian notion of the Messiah, there'll never be world redemption. So if we can murder, exile, or convert the Jew, there'd be world redemption. Then when the dominant phase of beliefs or the way people viewed the world, the dominant worldview shifted from theology, religion to race, biology, and nation, the Jew became the wrong race in the wrong place. And that the only way to save the white Aryan race and nation was to eliminate the Jew. And unlike the theological Christian anti-Semitism, the Jew could not convert the race because it was taught that it was inherent in our essence. So the Jew had to be eliminated, morally required in both cases. And today, if Israel is an apartheid, occupying, racist, now genocidal state, from a liberal human rights perspective, it has to be eliminated. And anybody supporting it is an enemy, morally required. So we talk about the Red-Green Alliance, and I think this is where, Judith Butler's statement, here's a feminist Jewish woman with a profession. She leaves her home in the morning without a male accompanying her, right? And she argues that Hezbollah and Hamas, he still believes this remarkably. It should be understood as part of the progressive left. Why? Because the progressive left, the intellectual progressive left, believes or argues and articulates that Western hegemony is a form of neocolonialism and racism, and that Western hegemony has to be eliminated, weakened, free the colonized people. It's very nice, you know. We can have nice conversations about this. You know, Israel being the ultimate model of the liberation of our land. But what makes this Red Green Alliance is that the Islamists, the Muslim Brotherhood and other jihadists and Salafists, they see states, entities, the states, not just democracies, or they see nation states as the vestige of colonialism and imperialism. And they want to replace not only democracy, they want to replace the state with caliphate. So here we have the Red Green Alliance. You have the radical left or the intellectual modern left who wants to limit Western hegemony and free the colonized people. And here you have the contemporary fascist Nazi radicals who want to create a caliphate. And I'll just say also, this is not the war in the Middle East between the Israelis and the Palestinians, is not over land. Israel is the only space, whatever it is, where non-Muslims have self-determination, where a non-Muslim, according to the laws of Israel, a Jew, a Muslim, a Christian, a man, a woman, a straight person, a gay person, are equal under the law. Even if Tel Aviv was the nation state of the Jewish people and all the other land was ceded, and people were equal in that space to a Muslim, that's an affront to political Islam. That's not tolerable. You can't have equality on the land that's a part of the caliphate. And the caliphate is an obligation for the Islamists to establish and to reestablish. If land was ever controlled, there's two schools of thought. So for Spain that was under Islamic law, some Islamists will say you have to recapture it. It's an obligation. Some will say it's become impure and you have to leave it. There's a debate. But for Israel, there's the Islamists want to liberate the land and create a caliphate. So here you have this very odd alliance, which is very strong and powerful, the Red-Green Alliance. Thank you. Thanks.
Hi, I wanted to ask you, especially since you've been meeting with Congress, are you aware of the bill that's been sponsored by Richie Torres and Mike Lawler to stop funding? And I heard about another bill. Do you think there's a chance of going through, and will that change what's happening? with the
Stop
foreign
funding of.
They will not allow foreign funding to come into the college campuses.
So we were instrumental, there's a deterrent act, which is supposed to oversee foreign funding. So there's laws in the United States that were created during the time of Nazism. There was a fear that Nazism and communism were entering the United States. So all nonprofit organizations, including universities, have to report any donation over $250,000. So the laws are there, they're just not enforced. And we've been arguing, we've been pushing the deterrent act. So we propose that from $250,000, any foreign gift of $50,000 or more has to be reported, and the law has to be implemented significantly, serious. So I don't know if they're supporting the same law or if this is a new law, I believe, that they may have proposed recently. Yeah, I think there's a lot of.
I think they're saying cannot.
Yeah.
Money from foreign.
Yeah, I would probably say that's not possible or appropriate because we have to have foreign exchange and ideas, but as long as it's reported. I would argue you can't take money from entities that want to kill American citizens. You know, at the very least, they want to destroy democracy, incite to violence. But yeah, there should be international cooperation in science and technology and education. I would say that's a bit too far if that's exactly what they're writing. But there's a lot of good proposals that I think are getting traction in Washington. Yeah.
To what extent, if any, is the use of anti-Israel Jews a part of the Muslim Brotherhood strategy?
It's a good question. You know, there's always been a space in anti-Semitic movements for using, you know, Jews, the quintessential stereotype of the court Jew. Yeah, I think, you know, in an odd way, Larry Amso is a professor of psychiatry at Columbia, argues that contemporary anti-Semitism, this, you know, the good Jew that is sort of being wheeled out in places like CUNY and Berkeley and whatever. It's almost like Christian anti-Semitism in the sense that the Jew had the option to convert. And maybe, you know, this is sort of a political conversion. They try to be accepted. So it's interesting. But they're definitely, in some circles, I would say, being used. For sure. It's a good strategy.
I just wanted to ask you how we can read this to people, what you're saying, like it's not accessible. If I go like on social media or I go to talk to people in the streets and I tell them all this stuff, they're gonna, of course, say that I'm a liar and I'm repeating the Zionist propaganda. And I want to just be able to know how I could prove it to them in like, you know, like in a minute. How many times?
You can do it in a minute, you have to teach me how to. But all our reports are available for free on our website, and it's isgap.org, www.isgap.org. And I assure you, our reports, you'll see, there's hundreds of footnotes and sources. And the colleagues that I work with to produce the reports are some of the best. It's an amazing team of really good scholars.
There are numbers to put some of it on social media because people aren't gonna read papers.
I know. So we have, to be blunt, we have a problem with ISGAP. So we have a social media team. And we produce good content, but it's hard. We need meetings. We need likes or whatever it is, we're not good at it. And we're now trying, we're speaking to social media experts who can try to help us, but we're weak.
I follow this guy on Instagram, you know, Josh with 0, and I really recommend him because he will do it in ways in a short clip. Oh, sorry, in a short clip, and he'll show you like coins, you know, from Palestine, where they say he's either and he'll show them, he shows books, he proves his case very effectively and very quickly. So I would recommend it.
So I can say in the last year or so, I realized that I'm a very old guy. Because I actually think that social media is the beginning of the end of civilization. I'm being serious, but my young colleagues think I'm ridiculous. So they're trying, and I know it's an important medium for people to communicate. But yeah, I really think that, you know, I mean, part of the crisis, this is really a crisis. It really is a crisis. I remember, I'm gonna sound like an old man, but here we go. I remember when I was a student in England and in Canada. You know, in Canada it was 10 o'clock, in the UK it was 9 o'clock. The news would come on, the CBC and the BBC. And it'd be 30 minutes or 60 minutes of news. And you'd have very serious journalists that would go out around the world or within the country for days. And they'd come back with a mini documentary of about 5 to 8 minutes, thoroughly examining an issue. And they'd have people who were pro or anti, and there would be experts, and there'd be whatever, and they'd come with a comprehensive report. And you learned, and then I would go with my friends to the pub and we would discuss and debate and argue, right? And the newspapers at the time, I'd read the New York Times and the Guardian. The New York Times had conservative intellectuals and progressive intellectuals, and you knew you were reading fine, you know, serious commentators with a political slant, which was open and clear. And you'd read it and you'd have, you know, informed discussions with your colleagues and friends, sometimes arguments. I know that on social media, people are buying everything. I mean, everything is for sale on social media. The misinformation that is normalized, to me, is terrifying. And now we have CNN just entered into an agreement with Qatar a few weeks ago. The mainstream media, because they're losing to social media, are now more susceptible to being bought and influenced. And I'm really afraid that nobody reads anymore, and we don't, I think, you know, people scroll for hours. I think it affects your ability to concentrate, to understand the negativity. I'm very, this to me is very concerning. Sorry.
So just to let you all know, we've got, I'm keeping a chat, so just keep putting your hands up. We've got a ton of questions. Just to let you know, I've got you.
So one of the questions was answered that we had in the chat, so thank you, is about if there's anything written about the contributions that are made to these universities, and you share that we can look at the reports online, so that was one of the questions as well. So someone was actually asking about why are we not putting our attention to focusing our attention on protesting Qatar. We talked about the BDS movement against Israel. How do we do that, or why aren't we doing that?
So I think that's a great question. I think as a Jewish community, and as a community of scholars and educated people who care about democracy and democratic principles, we've been watching symptoms. You know, there's one bad professor saying horrible things, and there's a bit of an increase of, you know, bad discourse in the Middle East Studies program. And you have kids who are coming home saying they're experiencing bad things in their dorms. It was getting bad. And I think our community made a strategic mistake. I think they do a lot of funding for students. You know, all sorts of programs, Stand With Us, AJC had programs for students. The students, first of all, they're kids. And they're leaving home for the first time in many instances, going into a challenging at times social environment. They need to study to get their grades, to get a good job or to continue with their studies. They want to focus on education and they want to be accepted. And they're only in school for 3 or 4 years and they leave. So what we did in ISGAP was we started training professors. The professors are the adults in the room. They often stay for decades. And they can teach courses where students can come and legitimately, for credit, learn about the sources and processes of anti-Semitism. When we started our program at Oxford 11 years ago, training professors, there were not courses. There were no courses on contemporary anti-Semitism in universities. Staggering. There were Holocaust studies, very important, but not contemporary studies. And I think the legitimacy that strong courses can give to the students and to the legitimacy of the study of being taken seriously as a serious issue is very important. So we need more education, more proper education, where the adults in the room are empowered to work with the students, as that should be, not the other way around, giving these poor kids all the responsibility to fight a fight that we didn't know what the issues were. We were responding to symptoms. And I think what we did with our Follow the Money project and what's beginning to happen in the Jewish community, there's awareness of some of the sources of the problem. And you can't fight a problem when you battle the symptoms. You can't fight cancer by giving some patient an aspirin. And that's what I think we've been doing. We've been giving aspirins to our community and to our society. We're finding very clearly that one of the sources, and it's complicated, why there's an explosion of anti-Semitism and anti-democratic social movements. That could be my next lecture. But in terms of anti-Semitism, we have to really focus on the causes. Once you start to understand the cause of the disease, you can come up with strategies and remedies for the problem.
Hi, so I just want to introduce myself. My father worked early on in the 60s. He founded UCRA. He worked with the Social Democrats
What is
Sydney.
UCRA? Sorry.
UCRA was the University Center for Rational Alternatives. He founded with Sidney Hook.
Okay.
And that organization was founded to combat extremism back in the 60s and 70s. And I see a lot of what's happening today as an echo, something that's recurred, and it's gotten worse in part for some of the things that people are saying here. Social media is playing a big part in the explosion of this anti-Semitism. Things go viral, and it's a democratic platform, but at the same time, it makes things infinitely worse. And also Qatar is funding, as we all know, all of this, but the universities themselves need the money, right? They were actually doing very badly at some point, and they're getting a new funding source. So, and then there's this Jewish Voice for Peace, JVP folks. What's up with them? I don't quite understand it. And is there any kind of way to combat that?
Right. I'll work backwards. JVP is connected to Tides and some far left organizations, which are also connected to the Muslim Brotherhood and SJP. So that's part of our research that it came out, and other people are now researching it. So here's a perfect example of what we call the Red Green Alliance, the extreme left, funding, Muslim Brotherhood affiliated groups like SJP that work closely with JVP. And I think the question earlier about having Jewish voices, denouncing the community or Israel could be powerful. That's what JVP did with the funding of the radical left, which they tried and were successful at hiding the funding for a while. But in terms of the source, I'll just touch. I think I would argue this is going to open a whole debate, which we, another time. I think that neoliberalism, I think that Reaganomics and Thatcherism, the notion that the state interfered with economic development, and if you weaken the state, you open it up to more free market business and investment, that with more investment of the free market economy into societies, there was a belief that there'll be more democracy. But we know from the interwar period between World War I and World War II, where states were failing, where societies were, more and more people are being marginalized from political and economic processes and institutions. We know that these conditions are right. And I started dealing with anti-Semitism in 1996 when I started studying the Muslim Brotherhood. And the Muslim Brotherhood, as I said earlier, were calling for the destruction of the state. And the neoliberals were calling for not the destruction, but the weakening of the state. And the state is the glue. The state provides, goods and services, transportation, food subsidies, housing, education. In Canada, it's a multicultural, there was a strong nationalist movement in Quebec. There was anti-Semitism, there was racism, but we all Quebecers took pride in the fact that we had an amazing healthcare system, that our education system was good and accessible to all Quebecers. And this went across Canada and other social democracies in Western Europe. When the state becomes so underfunded, and, forgive me, but migrant workers who come in, who get a fraction of what the wages of a citizen is, who undermine the working class, right? Who, and the state can't support and, even maintain the borders because the free market system wants cheaper labor. It's cheaper to have immigrants without rights than citizens that have rights, where the state can provide proper healthcare and education and other important integral goods and services to the functioning of a society. When the society begins to break down, we know you have anti-Semitism, you have xenophobia, you have the rise of nationalism. And I think here we are. And as I said earlier, and if you come from the background where you're knowledgeable of dealing with extremist movements, here we are. And I think, as I said earlier, anti-Semitism is an early warning system for something deeply structurally wrong with our society. And this is part of the crisis.
Thank you so much for such an interesting, troubling talk. Not to make things worse, but you can say that there's this systemic anti-Semitism, and we haven't really found the answer. And there's a curtain that seems to be drawing in upon us. All the sources of information are really polluted. That is, if you go to Wikipedia, you discover that Israel attacked the Arab nations in 1948. If you, I put in a query recently about what are some quotes of Karl Marx, So what comes up about Jews are about haggling and religion is money, but without being asked, ChatGPT tells me that Marx is not anti-Semitic, he's just using a cultural prop to describe the way money was used in the Middle Ages. And then beyond that, we have the students of the university are now entering the teaching corps in K through 12, and the students are coming. They're being taught this, and somehow we need to find a way of having a systemic effort against it. And I couldn't close without saying one thing. So here we have a group, CAFI, in the City University. We have written maybe a dozen, very thoughtful and sometimes supportive letters to the chancellor here at CUNY, who've never even gotten a response to any request we've had. So we're really stifled. We don't know how to proceed.
So I would say, in terms of how you proceed, I think, this is not the definitive answer, this is my response. I actually think that it's illegal in the United States of America to discriminate against people. It's illegal for the federal government to fund private businesses or public entities that discriminate. And from what you know CUNY infinitely better than me, but from afar, when I read about what's happening here and other universities, there's clearly discrimination. I don't know how much money CUNY gets from Title VI funding from the federal government. It's not legal if there's discrimination here. And I believe, I'm hopeful, I don't believe, I'm hopeful that this administration is going to take anti-Semitism seriously because they're committed to fighting anti-Semitism, and I think they're also committed, for attacking kind of a liberal institution. So it's dangerous political waters. But I think that if you make a case if you get a good lawyer in DC, and there are some entities which I'm happy to speak to anybody here about. There's a group of philanthropists that are supporting lawsuits on the condition that there's no settlement. Because when you settle, and law firms want to make a quick buck, and some of the plaintiffs want to make a quick buck. But if you don't settle, you get access to discovery. And that would be very difficult for universities if there's discovery, because all these emails, all these anti-Semitic, anti-Israel emails that are part of the culture will be brought into the trial. So, and I can put you in touch. There's a group of very serious philanthropists with means that will fund lawsuits and legal bills for groups of people that will fight a lawsuit to its end. And so I think that, so our community is waking up. And I think when you wake up the community, we're very resourceful and creative. The enemy is, wealthy, but with a bit of sechel, as they say, and smaller resources, but, I think we can do a lot, and again, Herzl said, if you will it, you can make it happen, basically. And I think our community, especially in the United States of America, we've never been so healthy, so educated, so wealthy and powerful, perhaps in our history. And it's a democracy. So with our resources and the talent that we have in our community, nothing to be able to stop us. And it's time where our community comes together. We need the intellectuals. And sometimes the intellectuals, and I consider myself one, we don't know how to tie our shoes in the morning, but we know how to think. We know what the implications of ideas are. I'll do the shoes. Okay, cool. I have shoes without laces. We need business people who know how to scale and create entities that are, will have scale and impact. We need strategic. We need the expert. We need legal experts. We need the experts in our community, and there are many, and the resources in our community to come together. We have to respect each other's language. We have to respect each other's expertise. Many scholars think that business people are just selfish, small-minded people, and many business people think that intellectuals are in the clouds and they're not significant. We have to come together with respect and harness the expertise, the energy and resources. And if we do that in this community, in this city, there's no other city in the world like New York when it comes to the Jewish community. And we're allowing our institutions, we're allowing ourselves to be treated like, pardon my language, like shit. Like shit. And it's enough. It's really enough. And our community needs to come together and stand as proud Jews and proud Americans. And stand for the ideals of what this country is all about. So we have to stand up. And if the president doesn't respond, man, we have so much resources and energy and creativity and smart people. You guys can come up with, I'm sure, a brilliant response to their sentence. I'm sure.
So, we heard Hamas say some pretty genocidal stuff and even mention the caliphate, which isn't topical, but once in a while they'll say something on memory. You can find examples. But I think, the actual leader of Muslim Brotherhood is kind of hiding in Turkey, hasn't said anything. But I think it's CARE that really says like the most variety of things that raise my eyebrows. So the most common thing is out of nowhere, Nihad will sometimes remind China that he hasn't forgotten about the Uyghurs. So is there sort of one country or part of the global south, the other side of the war, that might see the Muslim Brotherhood make too much progress and break first? And sort of break away first? Because, I mean, China obviously is communist, they don't wanna see a caliphate. Russia doesn't fit really in any bucket, they're just playing everyone against each other. So who do you think would break away first if the Muslim Brotherhood got too successful?
The Muslim Brotherhood, which countries will break away? So I'm gonna be positive because it's been a heavy lecture and your questions have been heavy. So here's some positive news.
Yeah.
I'm cautiously optimistic that there'll be peace breaking out between Israel and Saudi Arabia. I hope. I don't have a definitive deep understanding or special connections, but from what I know, I'm optimistic. And I'm optimistic because the Saudis and other Gulf states are fearful of Qatar and its relationship to Iran and its support of the Muslim Brotherhood. The UAE and other Gulf states and the Saudis have a deep fear of the Brotherhood and Iran, which is also, common enemies of Israel. And I believe that there's going to be a rapprochement soon. If that happens, I really think it'll have a tremendous influence on the region, on Israel, and on Palestinian society. So I'm optimistic. We will see in the next few months what's happening. And I think if developments are positive, a lot of these issues will have a lot of the remedies to anti-Semitism and radical Islam in our society, it will have an impact. Because the UAE and the Saudis and others are terrified and very upset that the Brotherhood and other Islamists have been given entry into American society, into halls of power, our government, and to higher education and other important institutions. So I think if we make a rapprochement with the Saudis and the Israelis and the Americans, there may be some more pressure in the United States for us to clean up our act. And if that happens, it will have implications domestically. So this could be a way for the radicals to be pushed back. And of course, CARE is part of the Muslim Brotherhood and represents the Muslim Brotherhood. And on a positive note, just before October the 7th, 2023, a couple of months earlier, I went with 3 Jewish businessmen from the United Kingdom, and we were guests of the Saudis, and we were given incredible treatment, and they knew I'm an American, Canadian, Israeli, they knew I'm Israeli, and we were treated incredibly well. People were very open to Israelis in Saudi Arabia, certainly in the UAE, where I've been many times. And they took us on a tour, a Jewish tour, Medina. We were the first Jews to return to Medina, perhaps in many, many centuries. And they took us to plant palm trees in a palm grove or orchard, whatever you call it, whatever the appropriate word is, in land that was owned by a Jewish family during the time of Muhammad. So we were giving a Jewish tour in Medina, which was non-Muslims were forbidden to go. And we were treated to a Jewish tour. And the thing that blew my mind, psychology, our perception of reality is a very interesting thing. And in my imagination, in my mind, Saudi Arabia, well, it could have been in another universe, another planet. And I was walking in Riyadh, I was walking in Medina, especially Medina, and the lights and the landscape and the smell was like Beersheba, it was like the Negev, it was like Jerusalem. And it's just down the road, it's just down the street. So I think, I don't know, if I have to end on an optimistic note, I think if there's rapprochement there, the whole region can really change and have implications globally. So there's hope. And I think that in light of the hope that I'm now espousing, I think here we're very privileged. These are serious issues. And I don't want to, limit it. I lost a job at Yale. My college at St. Anthony's College has been purged. This one Jewish woman left, who's a graduate student who suffers every day there. And I'm sure there's stories in this room that are similar. So these stories, this is not, I don't want to minimize the struggles that we face. But at the same time, we are so fortunate to have the resources, the education, the health, and the possibilities to fight in creative ways. So the only thing I can say is this mentor who was from South Africa brought me into the anti-apartheid movement, and I met all the Black consciousness leaders. He gave me this little book, it's called The World's Greatest Salesman. I don't know if anybody saw it. So you can read it in 30 minutes. And the lesson of The World's Greatest Salesman is that when you have a hurdle in your life, it's a great thing. Embrace it. Because it means that you're going somewhere. And if you have no hurdles, if we're negative, if we withdraw, if we become smaller, you won't have any hurdles, there'll be no tension, but you're not going anywhere good. We have hurdles, we have challenges. But I know everybody in this room, if you got together creatively with your colleagues at CUNY or in the community and beyond the Jewish community with friends and neighbors, what we can do, especially in this free country, is, it's boundless. So don't, when you catch yourself being overwhelmed and a little bit negative, catch yourself. You have a hurdle, you have a problem, but we have the capacity to do amazing things. And, in Jewish ethics, this is what we're always judged on, our action and our inaction. And we're taught, our Jewish ethics is that our role and our purpose in this life is to try to make this place better. When, we leave it, we should do our bit to make it better. And that our work is never done, but we can never stop. On Shabbat, you're not even allowed to think about the problem. It's a day of, it's another, read Heschel's book on Shabbat, beautiful. We enter into another realm. But during the week, we have to make this place a better place. This is why we're here, ultimately. And so the Jewish wisdom and the Jewish teachings is something that could be very empowering. And our Jewish Consciousness Project is all about that. And there's other amazing individuals, amazing groups fighting the fight. So we have purpose in our lives, which is good. It's not easy, but I'm sure we will prevail. I'm sure of it. We put our minds together and our energy, there's no limit what we can do. So really, it's a privilege to be here in this room. I know you're all engaged. So ISGAP, so we're an entity in the United States, Canada, the UK, Italy, and Israel. We have 80 research fellows. We're always looking for more intellectual participants. We have this Oxford summer program, which everybody's welcome to apply. It's a 2-week intensive training program on the interdisciplinary study of anti-Semitism. We really have, I think it's the best project that we do. It's very intense. It's 2 weeks of intense training. We expect the scholars to try to create a project, a new course curriculum. We have Elie Wiesel, Martin Luther King scholars. These are graduate students and sometimes undergraduate students who are brilliant students and student leaders. We create a program for them. We have 600 graduates. We have a postdoctoral training program. We're looking for postdoctoral, we have fellowships, 2-year fellowships for scholars to be trained by our colleagues. We have 6 faculty members. We created a ISGAP Français. So we have some scholars in Paris and Brussels, and also Morocco that are engaged. We do seminars in English, online, Arabic, Spanish, and French. And there's, and they're translated because there's amazing intellectual activities in different languages that are slightly nuanced and different. So we're trying to bring scholars together despite language and intellectual historical differences, which I think is really exciting. We have a certificate training program online. We have 16 courses in an academic year. You meet once a week for 4 weeks with amazing scholars. And if you take 6 courses, you get a certificate from ISGAP. And we do other programs, and we're looking to, engage scholars. If anybody wants to apply, if anybody's interested in Oxford or being a fellow, you're welcome to call us or our office. We have a brilliant young scholar, Zahava Feldstein, who recently joined us. She's in charge of networking, academic networking. She's a brilliant scholar. She was at Stanford University and was basically kicked out because of anti-Semitism. It's a whole story, but now she's with us and she's brilliant. So she's helping to build our network. So, and we want to engage scholars in the community. And I keep telling everybody that ISGAP is like a canvas. And if anybody wants to take a piece of the canvas and develop it, everybody is very welcome. It has to be, a major effort from different disciplines and different areas of expertise. That's us. Amen.
Thank you everyone online, thank you everyone here, thank you to every single person who helped put this together.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here, your expertise in everything, and hopefully this is just the beginning of the conversation. And we'll continue more. Thank you so much.
Thank you.